In the vast tapestry of Sanctuary's history, few organizations have wielded such profound influence over the fate of humanity as the Horadrim. Their name echoes through the ages, whispered in reverence by scholars, and spoken with hope by those who still remember the darkness they held at bay. Tonight, we delve deep into the chronicles of these legendary mage warriors, exploring their origins, their triumphs, their tragic dissolution, and the lasting legacy they left upon our world. To understand the Horadrim, we must first understand the world that necessitated their creation. Picture, if you will, a time when the veil between the mortal realm and the burning hells grew perilously thin. When demons walked freely among men, corrupting souls and laying waste to entire civilizations, this was the age that gave birth to the Horadrim, an age when humanity's very survival hung by the most tenuous of threads. The story begins not with the Brotherhood itself, but with the events that would make their formation inevitable. In the depths of the burning hells, a civil war had erupted among the prime evils themselves. Diablo, the lord of terror, Mephisto, the lord of hatred, and Baal, the lord of destruction. These three had grown too powerful, too ambitious for their lesser brethren to tolerate. In an event that would come to be known as the Dark Exile, the lesser evils rose up against their masters, banishing the three from hell itself. But this victory for the lesser evils would prove to be humanity's curse. Cast out from their infernal realm, the prime evils found themselves in Sanctuary, the mortal world. Here, among the unsuspecting humans, they discovered souls ripe for corruption, bodies perfect for possession, and a world unprepared for the horror they would unleash. For centuries the three wandered Sanctuary, spreading their influence like a plague. Mephisto established himself in the eastern jungles, corrupting the Zakharum faith from within. Baal rampaged across the lands, leaving destruction in his wake. And Diablo, perhaps the most insidious of all, moved from host to host, spreading terror wherever he touched. Nations fell, religions crumbled, and humanity seemed destined for either extinction or eternal servitude to these dark masters. It was during this darkest of hours that a figure emerged who would change the course of history. Tal Rasha was his name, though in those days he was known simply as a mage of exceptional skill and wisdom among the Vizirai clan. The Vizirai, you must understand, were not merely sorcerers. They were among the most powerful practitioners of the arcane arts in all of Sanctuary. Their libraries contained knowledge accumulated over millennia, their understanding of magic unmatched by any save perhaps the ancient Nephilim themselves. But Tal Rasha saw what many of his brethren did not or would not acknowledge. He recognized that the increasing chaos plaguing the world was not random, not merely the result of human nature or political upheaval. There was a pattern to the madness, a dark intelligence guiding events from the shadows. Through years of careful study and investigation, Tal Rasha uncovered the truth. The prime evils walked among them. This revelation might have driven a lesser man to despair, but Tal Rasha was made of sterner stuff. He understood that no single mage, no matter how powerful, could hope to stand against even one of the three, let alone all of them. What was needed was unity, cooperation on a scale never before seen among the fractious mage clans. And so began his great work, not a spell or enchantment, but something far more difficult, the forging of an alliance. The task seemed impossible. The mage clans of Sanctuary had long been divided by philosophy, methodology, and old grudges. The Vizirai, with their academic approach to magic and their great libraries in Chaldeum, looked down upon what they considered the primitive practices of others. The priests of Rathmar, those we now call necromancers, were viewed with suspicion and fear for their trafficking with death and the undead. The Umbaru of the Torajan jungles were dismissed as primitive witch doctors. The disciples of Esu, predecessors to the sorceresses, kept largely to themselves, sharing their secrets with few outside their order. Yet Tal Rasha persevered. He traveled from clan to clan, kingdom to kingdom, speaking truth to those who would listen. He showed them the signs, helped them see the patterns of corruption spreading across the land. More importantly, he made them understand that their petty differences meant nothing in the face of the annihilation the prime evils represented. It took years, but eventually, Tal Rasha's efforts bore fruit. Representatives from the various mage clans agreed to meet in a location lost to history. Some say it was in the desert wastes near Lutgolen. Others claim it was in the shadow of Mount Ariat itself. What we do know is that at this gathering, something unprecedented occurred. Ancient rivalries were set aside. Old wounds were, if not healed, at least bandaged for the greater good. But even united, the mages knew they could not simply battle the prime evils with conventional magic. The three were too powerful, too cunning, and worst of all, effectively immortal. Destroying their physical forms would only delay the inevitable. They would simply possess new hosts and begin their reign of terror anew. What was needed was a way to contain them, to imprison them in such a manner that they could never again threaten sanctuary. It was at this crucial juncture that the Horadrim received aid from a most unexpected source. The archangel Tyrael, the aspect of justice, descended from the high heavens themselves to offer his assistance. This was unprecedented. Never before had an angel so directly intervened in mortal affairs. But Tyrael had been watching the prime evil's rampage across sanctuary, and he understood that the balance between heaven and hell, order and chaos, hung in the balance. Tyrael brought with him 3 sacred stones, artifacts of immense power that he called Soulstones. These crystalline objects, he explained, had been crafted in the heavenly forge itself, designed specifically to contain the essence of a prime evil. But there was a catch. The Soulstones could not simply be used as weapons. The prime evils had to be weakened first, their physical forms destroyed, their essence made vulnerable. Only then could the Soulstones capture and contain them. With Tyrael's guidance and the Soulstones in hand, the alliance of mages formally became the Horadrim. The name itself is significant. In the old tongue, it means brothers of the light, signifying not just their united purpose, but their dedication to standing against the darkness. They took sacred oaths, binding themselves and their descendants to this cause. They were no longer merely vizieri or priests of Rathma or any other designation. They were Horadrim, and their missions superseded all other loyalties. The structure of the Horadrim was carefully crafted to ensure both effectiveness and continuity. At its head stood Tal Rasha, recognized by all as the most powerful and wise among them. Beneath him, the Brotherhood was organized into cells, each responsible for a different aspect of their great work. Some focused on tracking the movements of the prime evils, others on researching methods to combat their specific powers, still others on maintaining the network of communication and support that would be essential to their success. They established hidden sanctuaries across sanctuary, places where they could meet in safety, share information, and store the artifacts and knowledge they accumulated. These were not mere hideouts, but fortresses of learning, warded with the most powerful protective spells known to any of the clans. Many of these locations would later become the sites of some of history's most significant events, though their origins as Horadric sanctuaries would be forgotten by all but a few. The hunt for the prime evils began in earnest. This was no simple task. The three had had centuries to establish themselves, to build networks of corrupted followers, to learn the ways of the mortal world. They could change hosts at will, making tracking them a nightmare. They could corrupt even the most steadfast souls, turning allies into enemies in an instant. And they were cunning beyond measure, often laying traps for those who pursued them. The first to fall was Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred. The Horadrim tracked him to the jungles of Kegistan, where he had corrupted the grand temple of the Zakharum faith. The battle was fierce, beyond description. Mephisto had turned the temple's own guardians against the Horadrim, and the very jungle itself seemed to fight on his behalf. Many brave mages fell that day, their names now recorded in the Horadric texts as martyrs to the cause. But fall Mephisto did, his physical form destroyed by the combined might of the Horadrim. As his essence rose from the broken body, seeking a new host, Tal Rasha himself stepped forward with the crimson soulstone. The battle of wills that followed was said to have shaken the very foundations of the temple. Mephisto's hatred was pure and absolute, a force that had existed since the dawn of creation. Against it, Tal Rasha set his own will, bolstered by the righteousness of his cause and the power of the Soulstone. In the end, the Soulstone proved true to its purpose. Mephisto's essence was drawn into the crimson crystal, trapped within its faceted depths. The first of the three had been captured, but the cost had been high. Many Horadrim had fallen, and those who survived bore scars both physical and mental from their encounter with pure hatred. With Mephisto contained, the Horadrim faced a new challenge. What to do with the Soulstone? It could not simply be hidden away, for the Lord of Hatred's power was such that he might eventually corrupt those around the stone, engineering his own release. After much deliberation, it was decided that the Soulstone would be taken to the eastern temple of Kurast, where it would be guarded by the uncorrupted remnants of the Zakharum priesthood. The Horadrim worked with these priests to create a binding spell of incredible complexity, one that would ensure Mephisto remained trapped for all eternity. The hunt for Baal proved even more challenging. The Lord of Destruction was not subtle like his brothers. His approach was direct and catastrophic. He reveled in chaos, in the collapse of order, in the screams of the dying. Tracking him was easier than tracking Mephisto had been, for Baal left a trail of devastation in his wake. But catching him, containing him, that was another matter entirely. Baal led the Horadrim on a chase that spanned years and crossed continents. From the western kingdoms to the barbarian lands, from the deserts of Aranok to the frozen wastes of the north, the pursuit continued. Along the way, Baal corrupted entire armies, turning them into his servants. He destroyed cities, poisoned rivers, and brought plagues upon any who dared oppose him. The final confrontation came in the desert near Lut Golain. The Horadrim had managed to trap Baal in a canyon, sealing off his escape routes with powerful wards. The battle that followed was said to have lasted 3 days and 3 nights. The very sand turned to glass from the heat of the magical energies unleashed. Mountains crumbled and new ones were raised. The sky itself seemed to burn. When at last Baal's physical form was destroyed, the Horadrim moved quickly to contain him. But here, disaster struck. The amber soulstone meant for Baal was damaged in the battle, cracked by the sheer force of destruction the demon lord had unleashed. When they attempted to use it, the stone shattered into fragments. Tal Rasha, ever the leader, made a decision that would echo through history. He ordered the largest fragment of the soulstone to be bound to his own body, using himself as a living prison for Baal. It was an act of supreme sacrifice, for Tal Rasha knew that containing such evil within himself would mean an eternity of struggle, of fighting every moment to keep Baal from breaking free. Tal Rasha's decision was not made lightly. The Horadrim debated every alternative, crafting a new soulstone, dividing Baal's essence between multiple vessels, or entombing the broken fragment in a realm beyond sanctuary. But all options bore unacceptable risks. Time was running short. Baal's essence pulsed with rage and chaos, warping the very air around it. The longer it remained untethered, the greater the danger to sanctuary. It was then that Tal Rasha stepped forward, not just as a leader, but as a man willing to embody the oath of the Horadrim in the most literal sense. He volunteered to serve as a living vessel, knowing full well the torment it would bring. The ritual that followed was unprecedented and, by all accounts, excruciating. The amber shard was embedded into his chest, fusing not just with his body, but with his soul. Protective wards were inked into his flesh, with blessed ink and searing flame. Enchanted chains, forged in the depths of the Vizjere stronghold, bound him to the chamber walls. The binding ritual was performed in a hidden tomb complex beneath the desert. Chains of the strongest metal, enchanted with every protective spell the Horadrim knew, bound Tal Rasha's body. The fragment of the Soulstone was driven into his chest, and immediately the battle for control began. Even as his brothers in the Horadrim wept for his sacrifice, Tal Rasha ordered them to seal the tomb, to hide it so well that none would ever find it. Accounts from surviving Horadrim describe what followed as a siege of the soul. Baal's essence lashed out, attempting to dominate Tal Rasha's mind with visions of destruction, promises of power, and the hollow ecstasy of annihilation. But Tal Rasha endured. Every heartbeat became a declaration of resistance. Every breath a denial of Baal's dominion. Yet this was no victory in the traditional sense. The Horadrim knew that Tal Rasha's imprisonment would not last forever. It was a delaying action, perhaps to last centuries, perhaps only decades, but it gave the world a chance, a moment of reprieve, a temporary end to the Lord of Destruction's rampage. As the tomb was sealed and the final wards were inscribed, the Horadrim left their leader entombed beneath the desert. Some wept openly. Others walked away in solemn silence. All knew that a part of their brotherhood had died in that chamber. Tal Rasha was not just their strongest mage. He had been their compass, their unifying force. And now he was gone. In time, the location of the tomb would be lost to shifting sands and forgotten maps, perhaps by chance, perhaps by design. But in the echoes of ancient texts and the dim light of surviving Horadric lanterns, the story of Tal Rasha's sacrifice would remain, a testament to the highest cost of vigilance and the indomitable strength of one mortal's will against a prime evil's wrath. Thus did the greatest of the Horadrim become the eternal jailer of Baal, a struggle that would continue for centuries in the darkness beneath the sand. With two of the three contained, the Horadrim turned their attention to Diablo, the Lord of Terror. But the youngest of the prime evils had learned from his brother's fates. He went into hiding, using his power more subtly, moving from host to host rapidly, to avoid detection. For years, the Horadrim searched, following every lead, investigating every report of unusual terror or corruption. The trail eventually led west to the kingdom of Khanduras. There, in the small town of Tristram, the Horadrim finally cornered their quarry. Diablo had possessed a local warlord, using him to spread fear throughout the region. The battle was fierce, but brief. The Horadrim had learned much from their previous encounters, and they struck swiftly and decisively. With Diablo's essence contained within the Azure Soulstone, the Horadrim faced once again the question of what to do with their prisoner. They decided to bury the stone deep beneath Tristram, constructing a vast labyrinth filled with traps and guardians to prevent anyone from reaching it. Above this labyrinth, They encouraged the construction of a great cathedral, dedicated to the light. They hoped that the holy ground would help contain Diablo's evil influence. With the three contained, the Horadrim's primary mission was complete. But their work was far from over. They understood that eternal vigilance was the price of the victory they had won. The Brotherhood reorganized itself, shifting from hunters to guardians. Members were stationed near each of the Soulstones' resting places, tasked with ensuring the prisons remained intact. They also became scholars and teachers, working to preserve the knowledge they had gained and to train new generations in the arts necessary to combat demonic influence. The Horadrim established schools and libraries, though always in secret, always hidden from the general population. They believed, perhaps rightly, that widespread knowledge of the prime evil's existence would only lead to panic or worse, to cults seeking to free them. For a time, this system worked well. The Horadrim maintained their vigil, and Sanctuary enjoyed a period of relative peace. But as the decades turned to centuries, problems began to emerge. The first and most fundamental was the nature of the Brotherhood itself. The Horadrim had been formed from disparate groups brought together by immediate danger. With that danger contained, old rivalries began to resurface. The Vigilance members began to chafe at what they saw as the primitive practices of some of their brothers. They argued for a more systematic academic approach to maintaining the seals on the Soulstones. The priests of Rathmar, meanwhile, believed that their understanding of the balance between life and death gave them unique insights that were being ignored. The few remaining members from the Umbaru and other lesser clans found themselves increasingly marginalized. These philosophical differences might have been overcome, but they were exacerbated by a more practical problem: recruitment. The Horadrim had always been selective in choosing new members, requiring not just magical talent but strength of character and absolute dedication to the cause. As the years passed and the memory of the prime evil's rampage faded, it became harder to find individuals willing to dedicate their lives to watching over stones that, as far as anyone could see, posed no active threat. The Brotherhood began to shrink. Where once there had been hundreds of Horadrim spread across Sanctuary, the numbers dwindled to dozens, then to mere handfuls. Sanctuaries were abandoned, their locations forgotten. Libraries were sealed, their knowledge lost. The great network of communication that had once spanned continents broke down into isolated cells, each barely aware of the other's existence. Perhaps most tragically, the quality of those who remained began to decline. The best and brightest mages were drawn to other pursuits: political power, personal gain, or simply the advancement of their art for its own sake. Those who joined the Horadrim were often those who couldn't make it elsewhere, second-rate mages more interested in the prestige of the name than the reality of the duty. There were exceptions, of course. In every generation there were those who truly understood the importance of the Horadrim's mission and dedicated themselves fully to it. But they were increasingly outnumbered by those who saw their position as a sinecure, a comfortable posting that required little effort. The situation was made worse by the corrupting influence of the Soulstones themselves. Even contained, the prime evils were not powerless. Their evil radiated outward, subtle at first but growing stronger over time. Those assigned to guard the stones found themselves plagued by nightmares, by whispered temptations, by visions of power and glory if they would just break the seals. Many resisted these temptations, but not all. There were incidents, carefully covered up by the Horadrim leadership, of guardians who had to be removed from their posts before they could act on the dark impulses the stones inspired. A few even succeeded in partially weakening the bonds before they were stopped, though thankfully none managed to actually free the prime evils. As the centuries passed, the Horadrim faced another enemy they could not defeat: time itself. The original members, those who had actually faced the prime evils, eventually died. Their immediate successors, who had at least known these heroes personally, followed them into death. With each generation, the reality of what the Horadrim guarded against became more abstract, more theoretical. To many of the later members, the prime evils were not terrifying realities, but stories, cautionary tales told to justify the Brotherhood's existence. Some even began to question whether the threat had been exaggerated, whether the resources dedicated to maintaining the seals might be better used elsewhere. These voices were minority at first, but they grew louder as the years passed without incident. The final blow to the Horadrim as a unified organization came from an unexpected source: success. The seals held, the prime evils remained contained, and sanctuary prospered. Kingdoms rose and fell for purely mortal reasons. Wars were fought over land and gold, not demonic corruption. To most people, the world seemed to be functioning perfectly well without the Horadrim's protection. By the time of the Darkening of Tristram, when Diablo finally managed to corrupt and possess King Leoric, the Horadrim existed more in name than in fact. The few remaining members were scattered, isolated, often unaware of each other's existence. The great libraries had been lost or sealed away. The accumulated wisdom of centuries was forgotten. When Diablo broke free, there was no coordinated response, because there was no longer a true brotherhood to coordinate it. The task of defeating the Lord of Terror fell not to trained Horadrim, but to a random hero, someone who stumbled into the situation by chance rather than design. And while this hero succeeded in defeating Diablo's physical form, the lack of proper Horadric knowledge meant that mistakes were made. The hero, not understanding the true nature of the Soulstones, made the fatal error of attempting to contain Diablo within himself, just as Tal Rasha had done with Baal. But unlike Tal Rasha, this hero lacked the preparation and the will to maintain the prison. Diablo eventually broke free, using the hero's body as his own. The release of Diablo set in motion a chain of events that would lead to the freeing of all three prime evils. Baal manipulated events to have himself released from Tal Rasha's body. Mephisto corrupted his guardians in Kurast and broke free from his prison. Once again the three walked sanctuary, and this time there were no Horadrim to stand against them. The story might have ended there, with the final failure of the Horadrim's mission. But fate had one more twist in store. Among the artifacts and ruins of the old Brotherhood, new heroes arose. They were not Horadrim in the formal sense. They had taken no oaths, undergone no training, been part of no organization. But they carried on the spirit of the Horadrim, standing against the darkness when no one else could or would. These heroes rediscovered fragments of Horadric knowledge. They found the Horadric Cube, an artifact of transmutation that had been one of the Brotherhood's most closely guarded secrets. They uncovered hidden texts that revealed the weaknesses of the prime evils. Most importantly, they embodied the same courage and determination that had driven Tal Rasha and his brothers centuries before. But even as these nameless heroes rekindled the legacy of the Horadrim in spirit, a more literal successor began to form, one born not of ancient oaths, but of necessity. After the destruction of the World Stone and the events surrounding the Black Soulstone, Archangel Tyrael, now bound in mortal flesh, recognized that Sanctuary faced threats it could no longer withstand without guidance. He had walked among mortals. He had bled as they did. And he understood, perhaps better than any other celestial, that knowledge alone could no longer be hidden away in tomes and ruins. It needed protectors. And so, from the fractured remnants of the old order, and from new blood willing to shoulder the burden, Tyrael began to gather individuals to form what he called the new Horadrim. These were not merely scholars or mages, but warriors, scouts, historians, mortals of skill and conviction from all walks of life. Their mission was not only to safeguard what remained of the old knowledge, but to adapt it to a world forever changed. Among them were figures like Lorathnar, a former monk turned Horadric archivist, whose loyalty to Tyrael and understanding of the old ways made him a cornerstone of the new order. Under Tyrael's direction, the new Horadrim worked to locate and recover lost artifacts, seal demonic breaches, and prepare for further incursions from the burning hells, for there was no question that more would come. But the creation of the new Horadrim was not without controversy. Some among heaven questioned Tyrael's decision to entrust such power to mortals again, especially after the catastrophic events surrounding the Black Soulstone. Others feared that the very act of reforming the Horadrim would attract the attention of hell once more. And within the order itself, disagreements persisted over how strictly to follow the traditions of the past versus how boldly they should innovate. Yet Tyrael pressed forward not out of certainty but out of belief in mortals' capacity to rise beyond their limitations, to learn from the failures of the past, and to forge a better future. In his writings, he once stated, "Wisdom is not in what is remembered, but in what is adapted." The new Horadrim may never reach the heights of Tal Rasha's Brotherhood, but their existence alone affirms a powerful truth, that the Horadrim's legacy was not just one of magic or might, but of renewal. That when darkness rises, new guardians will rise to meet it, not because they are chosen, but because they choose. In the end, it was these spiritual successors to the Horadrim who succeeded where the original Brotherhood had ultimately failed. They not only defeated the prime evils, but destroyed the Soulstones themselves, ensuring that the three could never again use these artifacts as anchors to the mortal realm. The World Stone, corrupted beyond salvation, was shattered, forever changing the nature of Sanctuary itself. But what of the Horadrim legacy? Did it die with the last of the formal Brotherhood? In one sense, yes. The organization that Tal Rasha founded, with its hierarchies and oaths and secret knowledge, is gone. The great sanctuaries lie in ruins, the libraries are dust. The unbroken chain of initiation that stretched back to the founding has been severed. Yet, in another, more important sense, the Horadrim live on. Their true legacy was never in their artifacts or their secret knowledge, but in the idea they represented, that mortals could stand against the darkness. That unity in the face of evil was not just possible but necessary. That knowledge and preparation and courage could overcome even the most terrible of foes. We see this legacy in many places throughout Sanctuary today. The new generation of heroes who rise to face each demonic incursion carry the spirit of the Horadrim, whether they know it or not. Scholars who piece together ancient texts to uncover demonic weaknesses follow in the footsteps of those first mage researchers. Even common folk who stand against corruption in their communities, who refuse to give in to fear and hatred, embody the principles the Horadrim fought for. There are some who speak of reforming the Horadrim, of creating a new brotherhood for a new age. They point to the continued demonic threats, to the chaos that followed the destruction of the World Stone, to the need for organized resistance against the forces of hell. Whether such efforts will succeed remains to be seen. The world has changed much since Tal Rasha's time, and what worked then may not work now. But perhaps that misses the point. The Horadrim were never about rigid tradition or unchanging methods. They were about adaptation, about bringing together diverse talents and perspectives to face a common threat. If a new organization rises to carry on their work, it may look nothing like the original Brotherhood, and that might be exactly what the legacy of the Horadrim requires. For now we can only honor what the old Horadrim achieved and learn from both their successes and their failures. They showed us that mortals need not cower before demonic power, that knowledge and courage and unity can stand against even the prime evils themselves. They also showed us the dangers of complacency, of allowing success to breed arrogance and isolation. In the great libraries of Chaldeum, scholars still debate the meaning of the Horadrim. Some see them as heroes whose like we will never see again. Others view them as a cautionary tale about the limits of mortal ambition. A few even question whether the stories we have of them are true at all, or merely legends grown in the telling. But for those who have faced demonic corruption, who have seen the very real evil that still threatens our world, the Horadrim are something simpler and more profound. They are proof that the darkness can be fought, proof that mortals can make a difference, proof that even the longest vigil is worth maintaining if it protects the innocent. The old Horadrim may be gone, but their watch continues. In every mage who chooses protection over power, in every warrior who stands against overwhelming odds, in every scholar who seeks knowledge not for personal gain, but for the good of all, the spirit of the Brotherhood lives on. The names have changed, the methods have evolved, but the core mission remains the same: to stand against the darkness, to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to ensure that the light of hope never fully fades from our world. This is the true legacy of the Horadrim, not their artifacts, though those were powerful, not their knowledge, though that was vast, not even their victories, though those were crucial. Their true legacy is the idea that mortals can choose to stand together against evil, that diversity of thought and method can be a strength rather than a weakness, that vigilance is the price of freedom from demonic corruption. As we face new threats, as the powers of hell continue to test our defenses, we would do well to remember the Horadrim. Remember their courage in the face of impossible odds. Remember their wisdom in seeking unity rather than division. Remember their sacrifice in maintaining an eternal watch. But also remember their failures, their inability to maintain unity once the immediate threat had passed, their gradual descent into complacency and irrelevance. The Horadrim teach us that defeating evil is not a single victory, but an ongoing struggle. They teach us that the greatest threats often come not from external enemies, but from internal division and apathy. They teach us that knowledge and power mean nothing without the wisdom and will to use them correctly. In the end, perhaps that is why their story continues to resonate across the centuries. Not because they were perfect heroes, they were not. Not because they achieved final victory, they did not. But because they represented something fundamentally mortal and fundamentally heroic. The choice to stand against darkness, knowing the cost, knowing the odds, and standing anyway. The old Horadrim are gone, but their example remains. In a world where demonic corruption still threatens, where the forces of hell still seek to claim mortal souls, where fear and hatred still divide us, we need that example more than ever. We may not call ourselves Horadrim, we may not carry their artifacts or know their secrets, but we can choose, as they did, to stand against the darkness. That choice, made not once but every day, not by a few heroes but by many ordinary people, is what will ultimately determine the fate of Sanctuary. The Horadrim knew this truth, lived it, and died for it. In honoring their memory and learning from their example, we ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain, that the light they kindled continues to burn, and that somewhere, somehow, someone will always stand ready to face the darkness when it comes again, for it will come again. The forces of hell are patient, cunning, and eternal. They will probe for weaknesses, exploit divisions, and strike when we are most vulnerable. But if the legacy of the Horadrim teaches us anything, it is that we need not face these threats alone. In unity there is strength. In knowledge there is power. In vigilance there is safety. The Horadrim are dead. Long live the Horadrim. And so concludes our chronicle of the Horadrim, those stalwart guardians who stood between sanctuary and annihilation. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, of unity and division, of eternal vigilance and eventual complacency. But most of all, it is a very human story, a reminder that even in a world of angels and demons, of magic and monsters, it is mortal choice and mortal courage that ultimately shapes the fate of all. End sanctuary and annihilation. Their story is one of triumph and tragedy, of unity and division, of eternal vigilance and eventual complacency. But most of all, it is a very human story, a reminder that even in a world of angels and demons, of magic and monsters, it is mortal choice and mortal courage that ultimately shapes the fate of all.